Let's sit down with Terry Bonn at his ranch in Fredericksburg, Texas.
No, we just live on a 420-acre ranch and just love every part of it now. At my younger days, I didn't know how fortunate we were to have this type of a situation where you could go out and enjoy life. It was primarily a lot of work at that time, and I thought that's what it was always like. But sure have learned to appreciate it now that I've retired and can sit back and not have to make a living on it, but just spur back and enjoy life and get up every morning and have some cows that are fun to take care of rather than hoping they won't die and that the screwworms will get them. And same with the grain fields. You know, that was amazing how Dad put up with that all those years. Just counting on it raining and your whole life being dependent on rain and stuff, and how they used to cut live oak trees and let them fall over so that your sheep could eat the leaves during the bad years. It's just didn't want any part of that. So was fortunate enough to get a good job, and life worked out well. Now I'm free to run the ranch the way I always wanted to, and hopefully the way he would have wanted me to on that thing too. So,
well, you're lucky.
Yes, sir. I am very blessed in so many ways, and that's one of the things I've learned as I've grown. Is just amazing how many blessings you have. It's one of the things that I think take for granted in life is you always want something more, but you don't realize what you have, and that
we don't appreciate it at the time, I guess.
Yeah, I know my mom once referred to the fact that if you could only have what you have now and it would be taken away from you for a while, you'd really enjoy the stuff that you're given. If it was given back to you, you'd learn to appreciate it, and that makes a lot of sense to me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I usually ask is, what's a favorite story that you like to tell? You've got a few of those.
Favorite story. Well, again, it's not appropriate to everybody, but just as we were saying in this Morris Ranch situation this morning, as we were talking about the old days of Morris Ranch.
Yeah, you brought out some pictures of the actual Morris Ranch.
And that was amazing how I got the names of people yesterday, which just phenomenal that I could do that. But anyways, as you said, Morris Ranch was originally a school, and it started as a church. I actually went to school there in my younger days, and through the first 6 grades I went there. They consolidated because they heard that I was moving to town, so actually they were going to quit anyway that year, but that pretty well made it for sure that I was heading to town. So instead of going to the 8th grade, I just went to the 6th. But it has been the hub of the community the whole time, and then after...
Well, explain that there was a community here.
Yeah, well, the community of Morris Ranch. I mean...
How big was that?
Well, the original Morris Ranch was 24,000 acres, and the gentleman that bought it was from New York, and there are all kinds of stories about it, but he did pay 25 cents an acre for the entire place, and I'm sure he thought that was an amazing amount of money. But
and there were a number of buildings out here.
Oh gosh, yeah, amazing amount of race barns and stuff, and people. It was a settlement that, compared to Fredericksburg at one time, had a post office, a flour mill, a grocery store, and we even have some letters from Dad in which he was able to send it home, and it was postmarked Morris Ranch, Texas. That's where he sent it.
So it's like you had your own post office.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it was great. But
how many buildings out here? You said that there was a number of them.
Well, a lot of them were destroyed for war materials at that time, and again, it was Germans, that did it. So at that time, that's when the racing was considered illegal, and that pretty well shut down the whole thing.
So it was a racetrack, and it was
oh yeah,
fantastic.
A mile and a half racetrack. I mean, it was a big one.
You raised these famous horses.
Yeah, he was known they were so well known as raising horses and for training jockeys. I think that's what they were most well known for. That so many of the jockeys went on. Max Hirsch was very famous at the time, and he was still well known all over the world. I mean, that if you're in the horse racing, you know of Max. So,
and there were communities of people who worked the land, I guess.
Germans, yep. Everybody worked for him, and for partial payment, they would just lease the property, raise oats and wheat, and then give him a portion of it for living there, and help him with it was a big community. They had a lot of things going on, taking care of all those horses and everything. But getting back to your original question, which we somehow circumvent a lot of times, I think you asked one of my favorite stories, and as I was thinking about that, one of the neatest aspects of that was, as it closed down as a school, it was still a hub of the community. We had Morse Ranch meetings there and everything. But later on, as that went on, a winery gentleman came in and bought it and established a winery there called Haversack Wine Company.
Here on this property?
Yes, sirree, on the Morse Ranch.
Okay, yeah.
So that was the first, Fredericksburg being now known as the wine capital of Texas, I think, but that was one of the first wine communities in the area. Mrs. Lyndon Johnson came out, blessed the grapes, and they had some Franciscan monks that came out and helped plant the grapes. So it was really cool. But the story I wanted to tell you was about how the Germans reacted to the introduction of wine rather than beer. So he had a big party for the whole community, invited them out, and everything was free. All the wine you wanted, and he had a barbecue. So it was really amazing. They were parking down the slope of the hill in the field is where they originally parked. And so as the party progressed, a few of them would start heading down there, and they were actually stumbling downhill. There's such a difference between wine. If you drink wine as they drank beer, it was a whole different concept as the two met together on the thing. But
so Germans are famous for having a lot of beer when
you drank a beer, you drank the thing. You didn't sip on it as they do a dainty little glass of wine. I know the first guys were impressed with how rinky-dink the glass was. He expected a mug of beer out there. That's the way he approached the wine. So one of the gentlemen that still lives out here talked to me a couple of years ago and said that he was part of that. He was old enough to be able to drink wine, and I did too, to tell you the truth, wasn't of age. But he said that after that thing was pretty far along, the good news for him was he lived out here. So it was probably 1.25 miles away from the actual place where we had the wine tasting. And so he wasn't worried about getting drunk and everything. How can I go wrong there? So he had a pretty good snootful, he said, and he was, he remembered getting into the pickup. And you know how that goes, kind of tap the pickup on the back and say, "Good luck, old gal. I hope you make it home. You're on your own." So he was driving home right over here. And like I said, all he had to do was go 1/2 mile, turn a corner, and go a couple hundred yards. He would have this house. Okay? So no problem. I got this. And that's the way I was. I lived close, and I wasn't worried about getting home either.
Perfect.
But the local sheriff over here in Kerrville learned that they were going to have a wine tasting deal out here. He thought it was appropriate that he would sit right up here at the corner of that place and see how it went. So of all things, here comes our good buddy who lives over there. I won't mention his name, but he said, no problem, came down the hill good, came around the corner. He said, I did get a little close to the fence, making the corner, but no problem. And he said about that time the lights started flashing. And it was the cop from Kerrville who was a horse's butt. And he'd give a ticket to his mother. I mean, that was how bad that guy was. So, you know, he wobbled out of the door, and the guy said, "Fella, you know, I don't even have to test you. You're in sad shape." He said, "Yes, sir. I realize I've had too much to drink, but I live in that house," and you could see it from where he stopped him. And he said, "I live right over there, and I can make it home." And he argued back and forth with him for a long time, and finally he convinced him. "Okay," he said, "if you promise, because I'm going to be right behind you, and you better go straight there." And "Yes, sir, I'll be it." So he said, boy, that was great. So he went back, climbed into the pickup, and he said, "I sat in there and started feeling around, and I couldn't find my keys. I didn't know where my ignition switch was. All cars at that time having a different ignition position." So he said, "I finally reached up there, and boy, I'm in trouble here. There isn't nothing there." And he said, "I leaned forward to grab the steering wheel, and it wasn't there either." And so he said, and finally he heard a little tap on the window, and it was a cop. And he rolled down the window and said, "Sir, you're sitting in the back seat of a dual cab pickup." So he was actually in the back seat. I said, "Okay," and he actually talked him into letting him try it again.
He tried
so
it again.
Got into the front, but he said he followed me all the way home until I got into the house, and then he turned around and came back. So I wish he'd alerted the rest of us. I'd have been more careful, but didn't have any trouble. I survived that one.
So that was perhaps the first wine tasting in Fredericksburg.
Well, I can't say that for sure. You know, I don't know what the history.
One of the first.
Yeah, it was one of the first. But it was amazing it didn't take hold. But again, one of the reasons that it didn't, we have something called a cotton root rot out here that's still real prevalent. It's just an organism or something that we to this day can't plant a pear tree out here. It will die right away from that.
It's in the soil.
That's in the soil, yes, sir. So.
And so the winery
folded the tent. Yeah, it didn't last long at all. Yeah, Haversack Wine Company, and
well, that's what happens to entrepreneurs. You take a risk, you try something.
Yeah,
new.
And it was such a shame because it would have been really neat being this close to the house, and but this didn't work out.
I hear you. Well, of course, nowadays a lot of the grapes are grown in West Texas.
Yes, sir.
The winery might be here, but it's for sipping purposes.
Right. But it is amazing. We have a winery right down the road there, and they do raise their own grapes, and it's amazing.
Augusta is just up the street.
Augusta Vin, yeah. That's right down the road.
You know, we were there the other day, and if there wasn't a sheriff's car right out at the front of it, sitting there waiting.
They make a habit of it. I know the first time I went over there, I accidentally knew the young lady that was waiting on us, and I drank a couple of glasses of wine, and I said, "Can I show you something?" And she, of course, oh my God, you know, we had a drunk sailor here already. And so I took her upstairs, that upper level, and she had no idea. And I said, "Out there is where Garrett, my son, lives. And you can actually see their house from the top of that winery. You can see the building itself." So she was relieved, and so was my wife. She had no idea what I was dragging her out there for, but it was great. We've been fortunate.
Who would you say is the most influential person in your life, or one of the most influential people?
Well, you got to go with Dad on that one. Dad was everything to me as I grew up. You know,
what was he like? What was he like?
Oh, geez, just so many stories, and that's all I can remember. He teaching me basically everything that I knew about life. I had no brothers or sisters, so basically my world revolved around him and all the learning of hunting, and so many concepts he taught me, just all what I would consider some of the things that I would hope I could pass on to Garrett, my son, and just integrity and I can remember one time when we were walking out of my grandmother's house, and it surprised me so much because we had just played golf that day, and he all of a sudden stopped me and said, "You know, you didn't pay me back that quarter." And I said, "What?" And I had bet a guy that day on a hole, and I didn't have any change with me. I just asked the guy, "Can I borrow a quarter for a second?" I had to pay the guy. And that was important to him, that I had never paid back that quarter, you know. He brought us a trip to Acapulco on our wedding, you know, and no big deal. But it was important to teach me that if you borrowed something from somebody, you paid it back. Okay, and that was so enlightening to me and made such an impression on me at that time. So I've tried to be conscientious in that regard anyway.
It's about honor, really.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Another thing that really stuck out in my mind is well, for instance, we were building a fence right across the river, and at that time we didn't have a post hole digger or anything, not tractor driven. You did it with a old hand,
banging it into the earth.
Yes, sir. And that was a rocky sucker over there, boy. You'd go with a drill and just your teeth would rattle every time you hit the rock, you know, and you'd hope you'd break through it. And we'd worked on that corner post for a long time, and I bet we were 3 feet deep, you know, and that is plenty deep for a corner post, and you just cement it in and life is good to go. And I remember saying, "Dad, that'll do it." And he said, "I tell you what, if you'll go on for about 30 more minutes, okay, from now on, every time you drive by that post, you'll be proud of the job we did, because that sucker is going to be standing up straight as a string." And I promise you it is today. And that was one of those moments where you just say, wow, you know, try and, if you're going to do it right, maybe even go on even a little above it, and you'll be impressed with how proud you are of the job you did and just not complete it. But in that same regard, that meant so much to me that Holy Ghost, they asked us to produce a cross to represent our family. So I got one of the old branches of this live oak tree out here and got a wood carver to use that old tree for a cross that we made for him. For me, that stupid post was so important that I went over there and took the hinges out that he and I put in there together. And the hinges, are you familiar with the gate hinges of a post?
Yes.
They make kind of an L shape. Okay, so all we did was take those two brackets out, the connection to the gate, and we turned it up sideways like this. Okay, so we had one going that way, one going this way, and they formed that part of the cross. And then we took an old part of a bridge that he had used. They took all the reinforcement out of that bridge, and being the Germans they were, used it for all kinds of steel gates and posts and everything around here. And we welded part of that on top, and it made a perfect cross. And it's so relevant in so many ways to me on that thing, just seeing that cross. But he was just an amazing man. I learned everything from him. I had no idea how much I'd miss him. And again, a life-changing moment in my life was when he died. I had just gotten out of college and was teaching and coaching and doing all that. And then got a call one day and they said, your dad's in the ambulance and being taken to the hospital, and pretty serious. So I went from the tennis court over to the hospital, and he had died fighting a fire.
Oh, gee.
A fire that he could have quickly called the fire department for, and they'd have come out and put it out, but that's not the way he worked. He was, by God, going to put it out himself. I caused it, and I'm going to put it out. And he did. He put the hose up on top of the deal when he put the fire out, and then keeled over dead as a mackerel. And that was a life-changing moment for me. You know, I'd gone from being in a situation where, sure, we worked hard, but I would get on a tractor, and if it had a problem, you know, I'd get off, he'd fix it, and then I'd go on. But now all of a sudden it was up to me to do all that, and really changed my life dramatically. It was amazing trying to do all the things he did on my own and still teaching and coaching at that time. So that was the year I quit coaching, obviously, and we were very fortunate that we had a Mexican working with us, and he hung on for a couple of years, just helping Mom and me just complete all the jobs that Dad had done on his own all his life. So
Some people say out of adversity comes strength.
well, I guarantee you that again, it's almost like he planned it. He said, I am going to teach you to do it right, and the only way I can do that is not be here and let you learn it on your own. And I'm so happy, not that he died, but I'm glad he died going full speed. I mean, that's so important to me, and I sure hope I go that way. I don't want to be one of those that hangs around and, hey, I'd be perfectly content to cash in the chips tomorrow. My life has been that good. So I'm very, very fortunate. But
That's brings up happiness. You know, we've talked about sadness. What would you say one of the greatest happinesses that you had? A happy moment in your life, or happy experience?
a happy moment. Well,
I'm just going to adjust the camera down here a little bit.
kind of hard to narrow that down a little bit too.
You had a
I
lot of
think.
happy moments.
Yeah, obviously meeting Joni, and
How did you meet?
well, that was rather strange. We grew up together in Fredericksburg, the big town of Fredericksburg, and kind of hard to believe, but I did not know her all during high school. I mean, that's impossible. I mean, we're in this small town, but she went to St. Mary's, a Catholic church, and I was in a public school.
That's another world. Huh?
Yeah, totally different world. I mean, I knew a couple of the guys from St. Mary's, that was the name of their school, but, you know, had nothing to do with them, really. They were just a different part, and we were Fredericksburg High School, and I was kind of a country guy anyway.
And was that a big deal that she was Catholic and you?
Well, I assumed it would be, and that was one of the things that when we started going together, I thought, well, there's a number of things here that probably aren't going to work out real well, and that was one of them. A early biggie at that time was her being Catholic, and the fact that she was, as I said, we didn't know each other in high school. We actually met in college, and she was a Longhorn, okay? And I was a dedicated Aggie at that time, so that was another strike against us. But the Catholic Church really responded well to me on that in regard to children and everything. It's very lenient, and so that was one of the things I did check out before we even got to doing anything serious. And we dated forever. I mean, it was a long time in her opinion. But
now we're in October of 2020.
Yes, sir.
How many years have you been married now?
We were married in '76. I was a math major, and I'll let you figure it out.
Okay.
And don't tell Joni I'm not responding to the number, because again, it's an unbelievable number to me. And but as far as pure happiness, I think when we got married, and obviously the birth of Garrett, to me that was, having a son was something that I had always dreamed of, and was just, gosh, I was unbelievably happy that he turned out healthy and a boy, and I would have been happy anyway, but of course having a boy. And then him marrying the woman that he did, Valerie, just amazing young lady, just really love her attitude. You can't go wrong with her. And then all of a sudden they tell me they're gonna have a kid, and it turns out to be a boy. And then another boy. I mean, 2 boys. Just, gosh, and the joys that I've had with them, teaching them to hunt and fish, and just enjoying life and looking at life from the brand new perspective of, hey, Opa, come here. Here's a grasshopper here. And so I'm going over there calling through the grass and being impressed by a grasshopper again, like I was back in my youth, you know, catching frogs. And they've been a blessing. That's been the highlight of my career, is just being retired and enjoying the grandkids is phenomenal.
But I'm thinking you probably could walk down the street in Fredericksburg and there'd be a lot of other people who are sort of part of your family.
Well, again,
what do they say when they see you?
That's a kind of a weird deal in regard to that. I did wind up I graduated during the summer, and that when I graduated, I majored in mathematics at A&M, to which we got to say whoop, and that was a biggie to me in my life too. But anyways, I majored in mathematics and just intended to go in the corporate field, because the guys all told me, if you major in math, pig at it, mate. You can go and they'll adapt you into any field that you want to. So I had graduated that summer. In the fall, I just decided I was going to kick back and enjoy life a little bit and help Dad get everything straightened out that we'd put off, and you know. So, anyways, and that was a fun fall. I did hunting and trapping, and I actually had a record of all the coons and varmints I killed, because it was a money-making proposition back in those days. It was amazing how much you could get for a hide. But, anyways. Out of the clear blue sky, I got a call from an old coach of mine who said they needed a coach to take over, because this guy wanted to move to a different school, and he had to go then. And so I thought, well, I'll just finish out the year, you know. And turned out that when I walked in there that day, she said, okay, you're not going to get much practice here, buddy, because if you don't start tomorrow, this year is not going to count as a full year of your educational years. In other words, that's a real important in life, as later on you try and retire and get paid for those years. So I had to start the next day. So I got to watch half a day of presentation, and then you're on your own. I didn't even have a math book with the answers in it, okay? But a lot of fine people took me under their wing and taught me a lot of things there early. But I also got the choice of coaching, and Coach Wicker asked if I wanted to coach tennis or golf. And I played both of them, but you know, nothing to. And I chose, for some reason, tennis. And in retrospect, I look back, and in tennis, you had 24 people that came out. I had this new coach, and they all came out and said, this is going to be fun. We got this new guy we can poke around on. And the golf team, they had about 4, okay, that came out. So instead of taking 4 people to a golf tournament and me playing a round of golf while the other guys did, we got to go take these 24 kids to separate courts all over the town.
Oh, man.
And try and keep track of them. So it was really a great decision in retrospect. Love teaching the kids. And at that point, I became hooked on the idea, because that was one of the things in college that I never could quite understand. Was I would listen to a guy who supposedly was an expert professor, you know, and I'd sit there and then didn't have a clue what he meant by that. And then we'd get a couple of us together, us dedicated guys, so to speak, and just talk it over, and one would say, well, this is what he meant. And I thought, well, why didn't he say it like that? I mean, you just explained it perfectly. And again, there's an old statement about the more you know of something, the easier you can explain it to the others, okay? And and that meant so much to me, because that was one of the reasons I stayed in teaching. I thought I can get this across to them in a way they understand, because I was there. I was not a brilliant student where you go and everything came automatically. I was one of those that had to fight through it too. So I was lucky enough to be able to relate to the kids at the lower level, and lucky enough to take the higher level courses where I was not bumfoozled by a question that they would ask, and so I could always fake my way through that, because it was at an 8th grade algebra level, and really enjoyed those years.
There are a lot of experts who can't teach.
Yes, sir. No, sir, totally agree with that. They know it too well. Okay.
So I understand that you had a pet saying, and that when you see some of your students, old students today, it's the first thing they'll say coming out of their mouth. What would you say?
Well, again, it's a strange deal. I taught for 29 years, and had some students that had kids that I had. So, and then some of my students I wound up teaching with. So at one point I was known as Coach, and then I became Mr. And then, so you could tell the different levels at that point, whether I was a coach when they had me, or whether I was Mr. Bonn. And then of course I said, you probably won't remember my name sometimes anyway, but so don't just say, hey, you, just go with Coach. Hey, Coach, I got a question on that. And so most of them do call me Coach at that. But one of the things that I always did was start the day with a joke or something, and we would come up with just goofy sayings. And one of them, I always told them, when you answer a question, you have to say what it is, okay? Whether it's quarts, gallons, don't just put down 24, okay? You've got to explain what your answer is. So I always get in the habit of, after it, write 24 what? And so I said, if you don't, I'm going to call them chicken lips, okay? And very few answers are answered with 24 chicken lips. Okay, so that's going to assume the way you do it. So that's what one will always come up with, some story that I told them. And we used a lot of stuff called the memory through association. So you memorize things like the stair step of the metric system is kilometers, and it goes on down. And we learned it by moving the decimal place in a stair-step manner with the stairs going down right. You had to get it down right, okay? And you had to have those letters in the correct order. So we just turned the kids loose and said, I need you to come up with a saying that lists those letters in the correct order. So what we always used was, kill him, daddy, bugs don't cry much. And that stood for kilo, centa, all the way down.
Centimeters.
And that made that sentence. And they came up with their own, just,
I think Judy was saying that you came up with a thing about how to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit, or Fahrenheit to Celsius.
Yeah, anything like that was again something where we used the mind association matter.
Now, there's a saying about you, that's wrong.
Well, I tried to get over that. Yeah, that was one of the things that came out automatically of my mouth, and I kind of felt bad about being known for that was automatic. That's wrong, and they would always say that. And I tried to get more positive, that you missed it by a little bit there, but it was always automatic that's wrong, and then we'd start all over. And
it's kind of a loving thing to say.
Yeah, well, it was a sort of, but again, our theory in class was just don't laugh at somebody, laugh with them. That was real important, you know, and we tried to stress that.
And you wanted people to participate.
Yep.
You didn't want to discourage them by, you know, making them feel crummy for trying.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they came up with the things like, as I was saying, the kill him daddy, bugs don't cry much. They came up with Kinky Herefords dated Bluebell's Dairy Cow Monday. You know, and as crazy as that may seem, I can walk up on the street and all of a sudden somebody will say, kill him daddy, bugs don't cry much. And you don't even have to look up. It's just one of the former students, you know, that's saying hello in their own different way.
How has your life been different than what you'd imagined it would be? You mentioned that you thought you'd go maybe into, I guess, industry, right? Every business in America needs math and mathematics.
Well, again, as I was growing up, don't get me wrong, I totally enjoyed the ranch life. My dad and his brother basically worked together. They divided everything up and did the land and the crops and everything. Each did their own part. I know I got in trouble once with Dad by saying, I wonder if Pete, his brother, is working as hard as we are. And oh boy, that ticked him off, you know. Don't you ever say that, you know. I know Pete is working as hard as you are, and I don't ever want to hear that again. Okay, yes sir.